Good morning, everyone, members of the media and to the general public at large. I will be joined very shortly by our press officer, Mr. Spider Montoute. Sadly, the traffic this morning was horrendous in being able to get here. The purpose of the press conference this morning is to deal with a critical issue that is upcoming. We would all have been following the government's decision as it pertains to the deputy speaker. And just by way of background, the government, when they were in opposition, complained bitterly and made a lot of unfactual statements that my administration was not interpreting the Constitution correctly as it pertained to the appointment of a deputy speaker. So the Constitution, before any amendments, said that we needed to have a deputy speaker to open up Parliament. But at any time, if the deputy speaker were to resign, then the House being all the members of Parliament, are to elect a new deputy speaker at its earliest convenience. Lawyers who opine on the Constitution confirm that that meant that the House could proceed without a deputy speaker. The business of the House could proceed without a deputy speaker. And earliest convenience meant, in our case, because all members of the government side in the House were members of cabinet, they would have been precluded from holding the position. So a deputy speaker had to be a member of the House who was not in cabinet or was not a parliamentary secretary. And so therefore, it would have only been one of the 6 members of the opposition at the time who could have taken up that position. And if they chose not to take up that position, it simply meant it was not convenient for them. The government, when they came into office about a year ago, decided to amend the Constitution, utilizing their 2/3 majority. And they made 2 amendments to the Constitution. The first amendment that they made was to say that if in fact a deputy speaker were to resign, that the House must elect a new deputy speaker immediately, or no later than the next sitting of the House. So that amendment means that the House must have a deputy speaker to be constituted. So you cannot conduct the business of the House without having a deputy speaker by that amendment. Okay? The second amendment they made is in section 36 of the Constitution to say that, like a Speaker of the House, that you can bring somebody from outside of the House to be the deputy speaker. So we have that provision for both the Speaker of the House as well as for the Attorney General. So it's not a new provision to allow you to bring somebody from outside the House. But what I am here to highlight today is that it was not sufficient to amend only section 36 of the Constitution, but you also had to amend section 30 of the Constitution. And I have the Constitution here. Section 30 of the Constitution is titled the Composition of the House. And the composition of the House is specifically to designate who the members of the House are. So when you read the Constitution over and over, it continues to make reference to members. So Section 30 defines who those members are in the House. And so it says that anyone who is elected from one of the recognized constituencies, by virtue of being elected, they become a member of the House, a member of Parliament. If a speaker comes from outside the House, by virtue of his position, Speaker of the House, he becomes a member of the House. And an Attorney General, by virtue of his position, if he comes from outside of the House, if he's called the Attorney General, he becomes a member of the House. No such provision exists now for the Deputy Speaker. So you can say the Deputy Speaker can come from the outside, but if the Constitution does not recognize that person as a member of the House, then that person cannot participate in the business of the House. Section 30 of the Constitution, so Section 36 of the Constitution, can be amended by a 2/3 majority in both houses, which they did. But Section 30 of the Constitution is what we call a protected provision. So there are certain sections of the Constitution that require not only 2/3 majority, but also require a referendum. And Section 30 is one of those provisions. Now, I want to explain in layman's language what that means and why certain sections are protected. The layman interpretation would be that not only do you need the permission of the majority of members, 2/3 of the members of the House, to make the amendment, but the Constitution considers it such an important issue that you must also obtain the permission of the general public via a referendum. So in this case, let's understand why that might have been made. Who the members of the House are is very important. And it also comes with a financial obligation. So if the Deputy Speaker was being chosen from the members of the House, there is no financial remuneration for that post. Because in essence, the Deputy Speaker is a person that's really just substituting temporarily for the Speaker. If now you're going to be bringing somebody specifically from outside the House, one would have to suppose, if I'm going to ask somebody now to sit around all day during Parliament, that you're going to have to compensate them. And so the Constitution would have rightfully said, does the general public agree with that? Being a member of the House is a sacred thing, to be held in the highest esteem. And therefore, it is not just the parliamentarians themselves that can populate the membership of the House, but it is something that would have to be approved by the general public. I have waited, the opposition has waited, to see what the government was going to do. And in the last week, when I read, like everyone else, and followed what has been taking place with the recent resignation of the Deputy Speaker and the appointment of that Deputy Speaker to become a minister, which is a story in itself, it is clear that the government is intending to bring somebody from outside the House to be the Deputy Speaker. I took the opportunity on Friday last week to write a letter to the Attorney General, and I also called him. And I said the following: Dear Sir, at a recent sitting of the House of Parliament, the government amended the Constitution to require that when the office of the Deputy Speaker of the House becomes vacant, a new Deputy Speaker must be appointed, immediately or no later than the following sitting of the House. In a press statement issued yesterday from the office of the Prime Minister, it was reiterated that Section 36 of the Constitution was amended to allow a person who is not a member of the House to be elected to the position of Deputy Speaker. This is essentially the same provision as exists in relation to the offices of the Speaker of the House and the Attorney General. We've been advised that the amendment to Section 36 is insufficient to permit the government to proceed with the filling of the vacancy, the filling, of the vacancy of the office of the Deputy Speaker in the manner in which it proposes to. We are advised that Section 30 of the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, must also be amended to allow for the appointment of a person who is not a member of the House to be recognized as a member. You would have noted that Section 30 makes provisions for a non-member who is elected to be appointed to the office of the Attorney General and Speaker and to accordingly become members of the House. However, Section 30 was never amended to permit such appointment to the position of Deputy Speaker. If our assessment is correct, and the House must have a Deputy Speaker, and as suggested in the press statement that the government intends to elect a non-member of the House as Deputy Speaker, and Section 30 is not amended as required by law, then we humbly submit that the House will not be properly constituted and will in fact be unconstitutional. Given the imminent upcoming budget and additional borrowings agenda which will require the attention of the House, this unresolved issue could create a legal quagmire and interrupt the operations of the business of government. Should you agree with our observations, and should the government persist in the desire to select a non-member of the House as the Deputy Speaker, then Section 30 must be amended. This will require 2/3 majority in both houses and a referendum. Should you not agree, or should your office be unable to provide a satisfactory legal interpretation of the issue, here are seen to be abide by the law of the land and not political expedience. Therefore, I seek your urgent response and appeal to your good office for a full and fair consideration on the matter. Should your legal opinion differ than stated hereinbefore, I seek your reference of the matter to the Court of Appeal for its opinion. I've chosen to make this letter public at this point. I feel that we are going to have a Parliament session soon. I believe that the public needs to be apprised and made aware of this pending situation. I was hoping that between Friday and now that I would have received a response, whether verbally or in writing, from the Attorney General. Because it's a very serious matter. And I have not. And so at this time, we have decided to make this letter public in hopes that it gets the serious and approves the expenditure next year. That if that now was not properly constituted, how do you remedy the situation? And so we think that it is necessary for the government to hold off. And there are other members of the House who can be appointed or elected as deputy speakers who are currently members, while they obtain an opinion from the appeals court. That's the safest thing to do. And like the situation with the moving from the Privy Council to the CCJ, you remember it was the opinion of the appeals court that there was a typographical error in our Constitution. And while we were not happy with that opinion, it was the due process, the right way to have resolved the issue. And so our differences on the CCJ and the Privy Council had more to do with the fact that even though that interpretation was done, we thought that the government should have had a referendum and put that to referendum and not to make that decision for them. Particularly, they were a party that had been campaigning that they represented the voice of the people. They were going to put the people first, I think is what their terminology is. So I think that at this point, we're making this public. We're making an appeal again to the government that there are too many important bills coming up, that they need to do the right thing. Clearly, our lawyers have clearly said that this is a breach, and I want to say to the government that we are taking this seriously, and if they proceed, we will challenge this issue in court. Now, I want to give all of us an update. We have a situation where in July 28th of last year, a judge ended up recusing himself from 4 cases involving both myself and the government. You would have known, because it was made public, that in September of that year, the judge was transferred to Grenada. And at the end of November, no one had communicated to my lawyers or to myself as to what had transpired. And it was presumed that the Attorney General would be the office that would represent the court. We are here at the end of March, beginning of March. No new judge has been assigned to our cases. The Chief Justice, who we believe is the custodian of the integrity of the court, because somebody has to be, can't be the government, because the courts are supposed to be independent of the government. So who is the entity that is responsible for making sure that the courts are independent and impartial? And this was not an ordinary person that made the allegation of political interference. This was an officer of the court. We pointed out to the Chief Justice, we have no idea why the judge was transferred. Don't know. I don't know whether there's any validity in what the judge said. I don't know. And so the only persons that can provide that to us is the Chief Justice. Now, we have to accept that optics is not always the truth. But for a lot of people, optics is the truth. And the optics are that the judge was transferred. And the timing of his transfer happens to coincide with him recusing himself from the case. And here is the quagmire. Here's the problem. If you've moved the judge and put him into another jurisdiction, in essence, what you're saying is the judge continues to have the confidence of the court. So how can it be you continue to have confidence in the judge, but you don't believe the judge when he says that there was political interference? The optics of what has happened is that a judge that dared to have a ruling against the government has been transferred. And the cases in which the government was heading for additional losses have been stopped. No new judge has been assigned to them. That is the Suffolk Town Council case. That is the Boundaries Commission case. And that is the 2 cases that we had in Parliament. So remember, all we had was a consenting order that reversed the harm to me. But what still has to be put on trial, as an example, is when the Speaker of the House, you recall, caused the Sergeant of Arms to detain me and force me to stay in the House. That's unconstitutional. When the Speaker of the House decided to hear an objection after I had sat down. When Parliament allowed a member of the House to speak for a half an hour as if he was presenting a case, and for the Speaker of the House to say, today I'm the judge. There's no role for a Speaker of the House to be a judge. He can't pick sides. He's there to arbitrate the administration of the House, not to be judge and jury. These are things that have to come to the courts because they're infringement on my rights. And when I say my rights, the rights of all solutions, what we're looking to do is to uphold the Constitution, uphold the judiciary system to protect people from the abuse of power. There's nothing more damning than a judge saying there was political interference in the courts. It doesn't just have an impact on Alan Chasney. This has an impact on all of us. Because for this to happen to a leader of the opposition that has this platform to speak back on, far less individual solution citizens who have no platform to speak from. Now let us understand the implications of what I'm saying. So here it is now that I'm having to go back to the judicial system to find a judge that would be willing to take the case. And that I am given the confidence that that case is going to be heard objectively, impartially, and without political interference. So that as long as this matter, the first matter, remains unresolved as to why the judge recused himself and why did the judge accuse the government of political interference, as long as that remains unresolved, then all of us must have doubts in our minds as to whether justice can prevail. And so that is how these two matters now have found themselves in the same bedroom. And again, why I feel it's necessary to publicize these things, because it is only through the people's parliament, the people who gave the courts, the people who have given the parliament the power, must hold everyone accountable. I want to dismiss from people's minds when we speak that the court is independent and impartial. It's in its execution of the interpretation of the law as it pertains to our Constitution. But the Chief Justice and the judicial system is answerable to all of us. And that has been proven in substantive opinions that have been given over the years. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's a case against the Chief Justice in which the public have won the case at both the High Court and the Court of Appeal, and it's now at the Privy Council. I don't want to have to go there. I think that we're better than that. I think we all understand what we're speaking about. This is not about politics. It's about our governance, our Constitution, and the protection of our individual rights. And therefore, the appointment of a deputy speaker under these circumstances would be unconstitutional and would have significant ramifications. As long as the case, my case, where the judge has recused himself remains unresolved and that no comments have been provided to it, it creates a quagmire, a lack of confidence in our judicial system. And I think that our judicial system deserves much better. And as I said, there are many times the judiciary makes decisions I may not be happy with, but I've never had to question the political interference and also the integrity of that decision. So at this point, I'm going to stop and open the floor for any questions.
Before we open the floor for questions, I know that Mr. Babadook does have a brief statement. I know that you gentlemen are pressed for time.
Yes, let me say good morning to members of the media and to those of our listeners and followers online. I just want to add a little to what the political leader has said. He has spoken extensively on the appointment of the deputy speaker. And as indicated, there's the possibility that the deputy speaker can come from outside of the parliament, of the elected members, and so a private citizen can become the deputy speaker. And let's look at the implications of this. Quite apart from the breach of our Constitution that may take place in such a case, there are other implications as well. It means that the public purse will be saddled with another appointment of that private individual who will become deputy speaker. And at the same time, we have a government sending out the wrong message as far as upholding the law, the highest law of the land, our Constitution. And we must bear in mind that the example must come from the very top, and that is our legislature, in terms of setting the tone for the wider society, in terms of law and order and criminality in this country. The government is fast losing its legitimacy to even speak on the subject of crime and criminality when themselves they set a very bad example. And I am referring here to a couple of examples, like when in recent times they appointed a senator against the regulations of the House, Silas Wilson, who is in the employ of government, was appointed as a senator, breaching the rules of the Senate. We saw in recent times in the very parliament where the leader of the opposition, it appeared that he was detained in parliament against his will, which is a breach of our laws in this country. And there are many other examples that we have seen where our government flout the laws of the land flagrantly with impunity. And this has to stop. And we cannot be sending out that kind of message to a society where breakdown in law and order seem to be taking place and criminality is on the rampage. Now, quite apart from this, being mindful of these implications, I just want to look at the issue of crime and the maintenance of law and order a little more. The Prime Minister has made a circus of the issue so far. We see now that the Prime Minister has appointed a new minister, the former Deputy Speaker, as a full-fledged minister in his Prime Minister's office with responsibility for crime prevention. A duplicate ministry to do exactly what his Ministry of National Security should be doing. Again, there are implications for the public purse. When a ministry is set up, it is not just a minister that has to be paid, but we have to take into consideration the administrative and logistical structure of that ministry, which includes a permanent secretary, a full staff, furniture, office space, and all of that. So this is really and truly an abuse of the public. This is really an insult to the public. And the government, especially through the Prime Minister, must begin to show, first of all, some more respect for law and order, so that they can have the legitimacy and authority to speak on the issue of crime. And secondly, to show more responsibility in the expenditure of state, the way they go about just spending the money. I mean, after imposing taxes on St. Lucians to make life harder for them, we are seeing that the use of our resources is going for creating jobs for the henchmen and women, for the boys, and at the same time not recognizing that where they have failed and accepting constructive criticism and advice. The Prime Minister obviously is too egotistic, having realized that he has become an abject failure as far as the Ministry of National Security is concerned. He would not do the honorable thing as he has been advised to, and that is to relieve himself of the portfolio. But instead, he has appointed a new minister while he continues to be the Minister of National Security. This St. Lucians must see for what it is. And, we are not a nation of affluence. We cannot continue to waste resources, and we cannot continue to flout our laws, and we cannot continue to insult St. Lucians in the way that the government of St. Lucia is doing. Now, talking about crime, the leader of the opposition did not mention, but the leader of the opposition was recently in Trinidad, where he participated in a symposium on crime. The opposition here in St. Lucia, the United Workers' Party, will very soon be embarking upon such consultation with stakeholders and the general public on the issue of crime. We are hoping that the fact that it's an initiative of the opposition, that the government will not be too proud and egotistic to participate in this all-important national exercise where we try to find answers to the crime situation in St. Lucia that has gone unabated and unchecked by the current government. And so I am giving notice that we will be soon announcing a date when we'll begin a series of consultations with the public, because we know there are people out there with ideas, with suggestions. And we are hoping that irrespective of where the recommendations come from, once they are credible, that the government will take heed and will implement them. And I do not want to put the leader of the opposition on the spot, but before I was able to have a consultation with him on the matter, I saw a statement coming from the Prime Minister of Trinidad, which I think was very unfortunate, and in effect chastising the leader of the opposition for having participated in the symposium that took place in Trinidad. Now, when you look at what is happening in the region, crime is a regional problem. And if you want to take it further, it's an international problem. In the region, we have seen an upsurge in crime in many of our islands that has been unchecked and unabated, which means our governments do not have the answer. So any government should welcome the effort of the opposition and the citizens at large when they decide to join in the fight against crime. All good well-wishers should be welcomed and embraced. And I just want to say that I listened to the Prime Minister, the future Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition's contribution in Trinidad. And there was nothing untoward. He did not delve, and I was proud of that he did not delve into the local politics of Trinidad, but he spoke instead as a regionalist. He spoke as a person who was concerned not only about what was happening in St. Lucia, but what was happening in the region, which also has implications for us in St. Lucia. And so I just want to congratulate the leader of the opposition on his contribution there, and I want to say to him that we look forward to your initiative as leader of the opposition, where you lead the charge in bringing about that consultation that should have been done a long time, should have been done by the government of St. Lucia, where we'll all participate and call all stakeholders to make a contribution as far as crime fighting is concerned. Thank you.
We open for questions now, ladies and gentlemen, to any of our two panelists here today to articulate
Opposition leader, with regards to your initial statements, speaking about the constitutionality of the amendment, my first question is why now? Why you realizing? Why is the party realizing the possible wrong or error in the amendment now? Because this was amended, well, it would have passed in Parliament in March last year. Why would it now?
Great question. And the question is, why is it that the opposition is only taking up the issue with the constitutionality of the Deputy Speaker right now? I know that they had been given advice on this issue, and it was my hopes that they would not have attempted to appoint a Deputy Speaker without making the necessary amendments. It is when the press statement came out, well, the first one was when we heard before the last sitting of the House that the Deputy Speaker was going to be, I think the first word was adopt the portfolio of Virginia Poyot. And then when we challenged that in the House, that the illegality of that, we were told that he was providing oversight. Well, that's what ministers do, so that did not satisfy. It was not until the Deputy Speaker himself said he had not been sworn in, he's not providing any oversight or anything else. That was then followed up by a press statement, and that's what I made the reference to. So the press statement is what's triggered it. The press statement that came out from the government is very clear that the government intends at this point to not make any further amendments and intends to go ahead and appoint. So it's at this point that the government could have made the amendments they made, but as long as they were not attempting to bring a person from outside the House, we wouldn't challenge it. It is very clear now, and the government has made it very clear, that they intend to bring somebody from the outside.
But was it not made clear when the applicant changes?
No, the question is whether that was clear whether that, when the government made the initial amendment, what they were going to do. They made the initial amendment. I didn't know if they were going to come back and amend Section 30. They could have at any point done that. I know that there was no action that followed to show that the current deputy speaker was going to leave. There was nothing written by the government that they intended to proceed with it. Let's again, this government has come into the habit of deceiving people. In opposition, the complaint was that the House should not be able to proceed without a deputy speaker, and that it was the responsibility of the House to have selected that deputy speaker. That's what they were supposed to fix. But they came to the House and said, okay, we must immediately appoint a deputy speaker, but then they made a proviso for themselves, which was to bring somebody from outside the House. That defeats the purpose of how the Constitution was originally drafted. So I can only say to you that we will never overreact. Governments can say a lot of things, make a lot of policy promises, but until we actually see that they're going to proceed with something that we find offensive, then we'll comment. And that's why once the press statement was written, the following day, we wrote, I phoned and wrote to the Attorney General. And I feel that this is sufficiently important and that the government ought to have realized that this was going to be a problem and how they were going to resolve it. I don't know if the government had gone and got an opinion from the appeals court. We would have never been told any of those things. So I can only react to the situation once it was made very clear that the government intended to implement the changes they made.
And you are going to be seeking access even resort that if they don't respond to your letter, you will be doing that before the next system, which is the budget statement, I think.
I don't know. We are only really told sometimes on a Thursday, sometimes by Friday, as to when the next sitting of the House is going to be.
I think the next system is March.
So I don't know. So we're waiting as to when that is. Now, if the next sitting of the House is March 23rd, which is going to be the estimates, this has significant implications, because if they were to proceed with the House not being properly constituted, then it means that the approval that they think that they have from Parliament, they don't have it. What's the implications to the people of St. Lucia? You must pass the estimates before the end of the financial year. If the estimates are not approved, it means that the spending from April 1st onwards is also not approved. Now, if the government was to irresponsibly wait for the outcome of a court hearing, and it means that they would have proceeded, how is the situation remedied? How do you fix what was wrong? And that's why seeking an emergency opinion from the appeals court, in my mind, seems the best way to proceed. I think I'm proud of the fact that we spoke to the Attorney General and we've written to the Attorney General. But at the same time, as the opposition, we have realized with this government that unless we bring things out in the public and inform the public of what the issues are so that they can come to their own conclusions, that's the best way to go. If we are to wait from the time that we file the case, you're kind of like behind on the issue, and persons then have a very different interpretation as to why you're trying to do this. So I think that we've given the government more than sufficient time to have gotten an independent opinion of what we have identified as an issue, and to to be very serious about the idea that we could have a parliament that's unconstitutional and the implications it would have on a budget.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what the leader of the opposition has just said, and to highlight the political expediency of the government and the hypocrisy of the St. Lucia Labour Party. I recall that when the Alan Chasney-led administration was in office, they held 11 parliamentary seats. The current government pressured and criticized heavily the administration for not appointing the deputy speaker. But let me indicate that it is not the responsibility of the Allen-led administration to appoint a deputy speaker. It was the responsibility of Parliament. Among the parliamentarians, according to the rules of the House, there were none of the members of the Alan Chasney-led administration who were eligible to become deputy speaker because they were all members of cabinet. It means then, therefore, that at least 5 members of the then St. Lucia Labour Party opposition, one is the leader of the opposition.
Okay.
So at least 5 members were eligible to become deputy speaker of the House. If they were genuinely concerned about the appointment of the deputy speaker, why didn't one of them accept to be? I went as far as nominating one of them, and he declined. The current prime minister was leader of the opposition, yes, but he led 5 others that he would have asked to take on the responsibility of deputy speaker. They never did. That's the hypocrisy of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Today, they have 15 members, 15 elected members sitting in the House, more than the Alan Chasney-led administration had. They cannot find one out of the 15 to become deputy speaker. They are now attempting to go outside of the House to bring an additional member of Parliament to burden the St. Lucian taxpayers with more salaries to become the deputy speaker of the House. That is what St. Lucians have to pay attention to, the deceit and hypocrisy of the St. Lucia Labour Party.
What did you say you were following the convention of, administrations well, usually you will get the government side, put on one of the
Well, that traditionally that is what is done, but in our case, we were saddled with the problem where all of our elected members were members of cabinet. That is not the case currently with the St. Lucia Labour Party.
And it also happened when King was Prime Minister.
When King was Prime Minister as well. And what is first and foremost is what the rules, the regulations state.
In the Constitution.
Yeah, and the Constitution.
And let me just make that point. Convention applies, okay, when there is nothing written. And it becomes convention. So there's nothing written, but we know this is conventionally what took place. But in this particular case, this Constitution is very clear. And the important component here is the Constitution entertained the idea that there may be a deputy speaker, and it was not going to be convenient for anybody to become the deputy speaker. And so it did not restrict the House from proceeding. This government, in their haste to play politics, have actually put themselves in a hole all by themselves, because they've made one amendment to say that you must have a deputy speaker. So that is what now has put this issue to challenge. The second amendment, of which they lied to the people about, which is about bringing somebody from the outside. That's not what they argued. They never said to us, hey, just go and change the Constitution. We'll support a constitutional change, and let's just change it so that we can bring somebody from the outside. Yes? That's a lie. They never argued that point. The point they argued is that the House needed to have a deputy speaker. They made that amendment. And that's why I say it's important to understand why the Constitution does what it does. It in essence said that who is a member of the House will not be left solely to the members of Parliament to decide. It's a serious enough issue as to who's a member of the House that you must go to the public by way of a referendum.
So in the final analysis, it is always the public who decides who's a member, just as we have elected members elected by the public. And I also want to remind you too that they made the comment that because we, at the time in the Alan Chastanet-led administration, did not want to leave our cushy positions as cabinet members, that we did not want to resign to take on the position of Deputy Speaker of the House. But they said that, first of all, that our cabinet was too big. There were 15 members of cabinet. Today, we have 17 members, but it's not too big. Again, highlighting the hypocrisy and deceit of the St. Lucia Labour Party.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. My question is about the duplicate ministry. Could you give us any indication of how much it costs the government or the taxpayers of the country to set up a new ministry?
Well, a minister alone is over $100,000 a year. And then if you add a permanent secretary, if you add any form of administrative staff, you're talking about another $300,000-$400,000 a year. Now, the hypocrisy of the statement is that they said that you're bringing him in to help fight crime. But yet at the same time, everybody's complaining about the lack of resources. And you remember that the government falsely claimed that they were putting a 2.5% levy to raise more money for security. So if in fact that we know that there's a lack of resources, which one do you think is going to make a bigger impact? By putting a junior minister into the Prime Minister's office that's already bursting at the seams with egos, or having another $500,000 available a year to help fight crime? Which one? I mean, here it is that you were saying that having sniffer dogs at $40,000 a month was too much. And you're now doing the exact same thing to get what? Which one do you think the people of this country would think is a better investment? The sniffer dogs? The canines? Or having these people in the Prime Minister's office?
The Prime Minister, I did ask him about whether this would have been a standalone ministry, as you mentioned, and his responsibilities. His answer was that it was not a separate ministry, and that he says that his PS would be serving as this new minister. Because I was a bit confused, but based on his explanation of the duties of the new minister, it was saying it was like a task force that would be formed, but as he said, it is a ministry, but at the same time it's an extra ministry.
So let me just repeat for the public that's listening to this event. The question is, the Prime Minister was asked to clarify as to who is going to provide the administrative support for the new minister. And he indicated that there would be no new administrative support and that it would be his current PS and staff. But here's my problem. This is the same Prime Minister that when Virginia Poyet became ill, said immediately, not verbally, in writing, that the Deputy Speaker was going to assume and adopt her portfolio. When it was highlighted to him that that was illegal, he then changed it verbally to being that he is going to provide oversight. He was then told that that's even worse. He then said, well, he'll be sworn in, right? And that he will then be adopting the responsibilities of Virginia. We then find out he's sworn in and is now sworn in as a separate ministry. And then I guess when he was reminded again, well, wait a second, you had said that he was going to provide the oversight to Virginia. He then came at the swearing in to say, oh, in addition to this new portfolio, he's also going to be providing the oversight to Home Affairs and the Public Service and Labor. Now I'm going to ask you, of all the ministers that they have, you're going to take the one that has the least amount of experience. Never been a minister in his life. I think that the role that he had in the police, he was never a supervisor. He's never held a management role. So all of a sudden, in addition to his pure responsibility, which is crime prevention and persons with disabilities, that you're going to thrust upon him these new responsibilities. I say that to say that it is clear that this Prime Minister, the pressure has gotten to him. And I think it's affecting how he thinks and how he acts. And I also have to question the people that are surrounding him, that he is continuously making inconsistent statements. I cannot believe anything, none of us should believe anything he said. It's the man that said that we were going to have a levy for health and security. He went as far as to ask people to make sacrifices, to find out what? That this was a condition to a loan. There's so many examples I can make reference to where on one day the Prime Minister says this, and within 24 hours to 48 hours, he changes his opinion. So I think one of the most essential ingredients for any government to remain in office is our trust. And this government has more than breached the trust, does not deserve to be trusted. And anything it seems that the Prime Minister says to you at these press briefings, you have to wait a while to see whether it's true or not. So I don't even think the Prime Minister has thought this out. Clearly he has not thought this out, because what he initially told us was going to happen and what is happening right now are completely different things. And I would like to think that given the finance and the youth economy and all the other things that the same secretary is having to be involved in, permanent secretary, right? A lot of work.
All right, ladies of the press, ladies and gentlemen of the press, we have one final question.
Okay.
Because the gen-
Well, one each.
I think
One
we
each.
take
One
each.
Yeah, they spoke of a series of consultations that they're planning to have on crime, right, and crime prevention. Of course, this is not new. We've seen a lot of these happen, national consultation. There was even one under the former administration. What happened to these ideas, and why we keep going back to step one? Shouldn't we be at this point implementing all these ideas that have been shared over the years?
I was in Trinidad for a training program, parliamentary training program on the Public Accounts Committee. It was very, very well put together show. And the opposition spoke to me about this symposium they were putting together. And what I liked about the symposium was that it was not political. She was just using her platform as the leader of the opposition to create an opportunity, a platform for people to speak. At the symposium was a young lady who has her degree in criminology and spoke about the plight of young women. You had a retired principal that spoke about the issues that principals and teachers were facing and confronting. And then it opened up the opportunity for people to speak. I think that that's not been done before. And again, people have to, and I think that that was the point that both Kamala and myself were making, and why we've agreed to come together. The Constitution recognizes the office of the leader of the opposition. It's actually officially part of the Constitution. We are part of government. Yet we politicize the position as being the other party. I'm not the leader of the opposition for United Workers' Party. I'm the leader of the opposition for everyone. I happen to get the position because we had the number of votes necessary to show that we were the largest opposition party. And it cannot be that at the regional level, the international level, as well as the local level, that people want to politicize the leader of the opposition's role. And that's what I said was visionary. The visionary part was to do this symposium and to create an environment that people felt safe to come out and speak. It wasn't about politics. There was no politics discussed on that platform. And I'm hoping that we can equally convince people who are retired principals, teachers, community leaders, to come to the platform and to speak about what the issues. What the Kamala is doing and what the UDC is doing is taking notes. If the government doesn't want to listen to the ideas, those ideas will find themselves, I am sure, in the plans and policies of our party. And I can say to you that every time that we have had public outings, That's exactly what we try to do, is to become better informed, and you see it in our manifesto, you see it in the articulation of our overall policies. The symposium, and I think, Spider spoke about it very eloquently, is to be broad-based. We have to break this mold that because you're coming on a meeting being hosted by the leader of the opposition, that it's United Workers' Party. If you notice at the symposium they had there was no party colors. There was no banners promoting their parties. And I really cherished the opportunity that was given to me to go and see what they were doing, and more importantly, the effectiveness of it. It was very effective. And there are people who have heartbreaking stories. There was a lady who felt that her son was falsely arrested and that he was abused. That became a platform. Now, the leader of the opposition was very quick to say that this symposium is not here to endorse anybody's, outbreaks like that, but found a solution by saying that they would help find a lawyer to represent her so that this can be taken up legally. But I want I want you to think for a moment that something happens to you and you don't feel like you have a voice. You don't feel like there's enough. You can only go on a radio show so often. After the radio show is finished, it's finished. So by having the kinds of persons, the community leaders and everybody else who were in attendance, she was able to find solace. So I want to say that this, I think, is an extraordinary opportunity. I said something at the meeting, which is very, very correct. I said that there is hope. New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, London, Paris, all at one point have been considered to be capitals of crime. Miami. There's a point in Miami where people were terrified to go to Miami in the 70s and early 80s. They found solutions to the problems. New York City with Rudy Giuliani, the broken glass policies. Anti-gang. And gangs are playing a significant role, not exclusively, but a significant role in the uptake of particularly killings and violent crime. We're not going to win this battle only here in St. Lucia. The battle has to be fought on a regional basis as well.
Yeah, one final question. The two gentlemen have a meeting of which they're half an hour late for.
My question is about the proposition to have a regional opposition body that has a voice at the World Bank and all these other international institutions. What brought about this train of thought? Why did you think this is something that is necessary moving forward?
So I want to say that the government has continued to try to say that I'm an angry person. I'm upset about losing the election, and I think I deserve to be in government, which is completely false. I have learned as an individual so much by being in opposition. It has offered me the opportunity to see things from a very different perspective. I think I have a deeper understanding of our Constitution. I think I have a deeper understanding about the rule of law. I have a great understanding about perception and reality. So it is true that the oppositions in this region are treated scantily and without regard. Why can't a head of government come to St. Lucia and also see the leader of the opposition? Why does he feel he has a need to come and take political sides? Why is it we're only inviting political leaders to come and speak to the country that are share the same ideology as us? Right? Because I remember when Ralph Gonzalez came and spoke on a platform here and made some very unflattering remarks about Sir John. And Sir John said the next day, "What happens if I win? How are you going to sit next to me now? How are we going to get on as political leaders?" Every political party has a 50-50 chance in winning. And that's why I make the point. A leader of the opposition is constitutionally part of government. And so I think that we, as individual leaders of the oppositions, have done an injustice to the position. Because our positions are constantly recognized so that we can represent the opposition, people who may not agree. Those voices have to be heard. And so we are constitutionally protected to oppose. And it goes as far as protecting our voices in the House. The state pays for the office in order that we can voice these things. And when we allow our voices to be marginalized, it's not my voice that's being marginalized, it's the voices that we represent in opposition. That is whose voices we are marginalizing. And so we've recognized we must come together to bring greater amount of respect and appreciation of what leaders of the opposition do. And I was very clear. When we come together as leaders of the opposition, it is not a unification on ideology. I'm not there because the UDC is my sister party. It's not. I'm there because we share one thing in common, is that we are leaders of the opposition. And we're banding together. And so I was very encouraged as to how quickly the former Prime Minister appreciated it and strengthened the idea. And we're going to be having our 60th anniversary here in St. Lucia, and several leaders of the opposition have been invited. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to formally launch this group and to write to CDB. Why is it that we don't get access to training? Why is it we're not being given regular reports as leaders of the opposition? Okay? The same thing applies to all of our regional institutions and to our national institutions. It cannot be that as the leader of the opposition, when I write to a permanent secretary or when I write to one of the other senior officers, they don't respond. It's not acceptable. Right? And so part of the checks and balances in our Constitution is a leader of the opposition's office that can get access to information and to demand certain things from taking place. And so I think we failed. We've recognized that we failed. And we think that we need to bring our voices collectively together to raise the profile of what is it to be a leader of the opposition and the importance of the office.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the press. I call on Mr. Montu to close off the press conference for our business.
Yeah. So let me just say thanks, first of all, to members of the media present here. And let me thank the people who've been following us online on live stream, whether in St. Lucia or in the diaspora. We thank you for following as usual, and we look forward to another press conference, press briefing next week. Thank you very much.